topic still. We were talking about hunting tactics that the predators use and how efficient they are, and how the Harris's hawk hunts, and they have flankers. You can see a flanker and chasers and all kinds of stuff. Now we need to think about. Oh, we're still doing hunting. We didn't do this one, did we?
Yeah, we did.
We did do this one? Okay, so we got done. All right,
Yeah.
so now we're on this one. All right. So what about the prey? The predators have all these adaptations. Are they just sitting there helpless, waiting to be grabbed up and snatched by the predators? I just got in last night. No, of course not. They have defenses, and so that's always a fun topic. So what defenses do the prey have? The first thing I want to say is that predators do not succeed every time they encounter prey. In fact, most of them have very low success rates. And so this picture is of a least tern, which is a tern that we have in Tennessee, although the numbers that we have in West Tennessee kind of go up and down because they nest on the sand flats that are left behind when the Mississippi floods and retreats. And so how much sand flat we have exposed kind of depends on our spring. And so some years we have lots of least terns, and some years they're kind of scarce. So we teach a class called Biology 475 in the spring that goes down to the coast. And as a part of that class, sometimes we'll do these little small research projects. And so we decided, my group decided, that we would watch these guys, these least terns, and count how many times they go down to hit the water, like they're going to catch a fish, and how many times they actually came up with a fish. Now, we're only there a few days, and so they only observed the least terns, 2 or 3 hours at most. And they got about a 1% success rate when they were watching. And so that made me really curious about what it actually is, so I did a little literature search when we got back. And for the least tern, the success rate is 10%, which is 1 in 10 times that they dive, they actually come up with prey. And that's not unusual. That's a very normal success rate for a predator, right? And so why is it so hard for predators to catch the prey? Well, it's because they have different types of defenses, and that's what this rest of this PowerPoint, I think, for the most part, is about. So one of the things we can do is we can have chemical defenses. And there's a lot of different things that can fall under this category. And kind of like when I was talking about the hunting tactics of the predators, you can see some of these arranged in different orders and different classes. This is a very broad category for our class, and so it could be pheromones, like the first one. They say fish release some pheromones into the water when there's a predator nearby that tells other fish to go and hide, basically. Some organisms release toxic substances, such as the skunk up there at the top, which is a spotted skunk. If you see a spotted skunk doing this, you need to get out of the way quickly. And they can spray quite far, so very quickly. And then some organisms are venomous. Like we have the cottonmouth down at the bottom, showing you his reason why he got the name cottonmouth. And then some have secretions associated with their skin, like the poison frog in the picture here, that makes them either distasteful or toxic. Kind of depends on how much of the chemical they have in their skin. And what we're going to find a little bit later is sometimes it's better just to taste bad than to be toxic, because if you kill the predator, then there's no learning involved. Whereas if you just taste bad, they learn that pattern tastes bad, and then they avoid it in the future. All right, so we'll get more to that in a minute. So sometimes it might be better not to kill the predator. So those are a few examples. I think I already showed you the one with the beetle that's like the skunk that sprays the stuff out of its butt. Yeah, that's always a cool one. And those stupid Asian beetles that are in my house, they release toxins. I don't know if y'all have ever gotten them on your hand. It's gotten to where I've dealt with them so much that smells and whoa. I've only eaten a few by accident. All right, then we have cryptic coloration. So this is a little bit more than just camouflage. It's a little bit more extreme than just camouflage. So you have different patterns that allow them to blend in with their environment. And so some of it I should put one of the owls up there, because like the screech owl, when it's sitting in its cavity, blends in completely with the bark, right? That's pretty good camouflage. You've got the fawn here, where the pattern's supposed to help it blend in with the forest floor. Some people would say imitating light going through the canopy onto the forest floor. Can you tell what's stick and what's bug at the bottom?
Yes.
You Here's the bug. It's right here. And so you got those types of things, walking sticks of various types. All of them allow them to blend into the background if they're in the right environment. If you get them out of that environment, they just look weird. So I get walking sticks at my house pretty regularly in the fall. And I don't know how many are around because if they're in the forest, I'm probably never going to notice them. But when they get on my back porch, they stand out. Nope, often resemble other things. So we got that. I think I like this one because of when I took animal behavior. That's misleading colorations. And so with the fish, I chose one that's a little bit more extreme. But a lot of our fishes have a spot on their tail. And what that's trying to do is to make the predator think that's the head and to go after that instead of going after the head itself. And so that's not quite as dangerous for them. This one is very dramatic because not only does it have a eye spot on its tail, it has a black bar through its eye to make it harder to see the eye. And so a predator swimming around is going to think that this is the head end rather than the tail end and attack that. Then you have the moth at the top, which I learned was as a buckeye, but actually I think it's polyphemus moth. But we always called them buckeyes growing up because when they open their wings, it looks like deer eyes. Okay, and what I was talking about when I took animal behavior, the professor I had used the same notes his entire career, and they were just yellowed, college ruled paper basically. And he would, even for when I was in school, and this is still way out of date, he'd use the reel-to-reel movies that you've probably seen in the theaters, like click, 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 click. But I could understand some of it. I'm glad he did because it was classic experiments and things that we would watch on those. But one of them was showing experiments with this moth and similar things with birds, and they would show the birds fly up, and they would open their wings, and the bird would be like, ah, and then fly away and stuff. It was really fun to watch it in action. And so it's more of a startling type of thing that make them think that there's a larger thing there than what's actually there.
Is it the same if it's like an actual appendage or something, but it's still meant to mislead? Like centipedes have the faux pair of antenna at the end of their bodies to make sure that.
Yeah, anything that's misleading would fall. Like I said, I'm using very broad categories. So anything that's meant to mislead them, to either scare them away or think that they're attacking a different part of their body, like the fish below. Anything like that's going to be misleading. Then next one is aposematic coloration or warning colorations. This is where you use extremely visible colors to warn the predators that they're toxic, and that's what I was referring to earlier. If a predator attacks you and you are so toxic that you kill the predator, then the next predator doesn't know anything and it's going to come attack you and you kill that predator. What's better is that the predator attacks you and you're immediately going to give them a negative experience, and that negative experience causes them to learn that pattern and avoid it. And so all the ones I have on this slide have reddish on them, but that's not the only patterns you can use. Oops, got more of it on there. Black and white is often a pattern that's used, like skunks are a classic example to tell you that they are unpleasant, that you should avoid them. Orange and reds, which is what I have depicted here for the most part. And then the yellows and blacks, like you get on bees and wasps and things like that. All of those are patterns that tell you that they can sting you, or that they taste bad, things like that. Has anybody ever picked up a saddleback caterpillar with their hand? That's the top caterpillar there. Mm-hmm. They're really pretty. So when I was, I was probably 8 or 9, maybe 10 at the most. I was doing for fun an insect collection. Yes, future biologist, all nerdy. But my uncle was a high school science teacher, and he built me the stuff to make my insect collection and stuff. And I thought, oh, look at that, really cool, it's beautiful, and put my hand on it, and all of those little spikes sting really badly. I will never touch one again, so I learned very quickly. But this is one that you do find around here, so be careful. The salamanders have the toxins associated with their skins, kind of like your poison frogs. And then that's our actual ladybug, not the Asian one, but that smell I was just talking about is pretty horrible. All right, so the one problem is the predator has to learn it, and so they have to attack at least one to learn it. The good news is once the predator learns the pattern, then they'll avoid that pattern. All right, any questions about that one? Okay, so speaking of patterns, what we're really leading up to is mimicry. And so we've got two types of mimicry that we're going to discuss. The first type is Batesian mimicry. And in Batesian mimicry, you have a model, which is dangerous or distasteful. And then you have a mimic that has the same pattern as the model, but is completely harmless. So I gave you one example here at the bottom of the page. We've got the eastern coral snake and the scarlet king snake that superficially look very similar. So how do I tell them apart?
Red touches black, it's a friend to Jack. Red touches yellow, kill the
Okay, so the top one is the coral snake because you got red on yellow, not red on black. And so the king snake, not only are they non-venomous, they're great because they eat other snakes and things, right? So we want the king snake. Don't necessarily want the coral snake around where you're doing stuff because it's quite dangerous. This is one of the more dangerous snakes that we have in the United States. That last bullet is important to think about, okay? And that is that the models have to outnumber the mimics because you want the odds of a predator encountering a model first to be high. If they're encountering mimics, if the mimics far outnumber the models, so they're encountering mimics a lot, then they're like, ooh, yum. And they learn the pattern in the reverse, right? The search image that we talked about last time. They're like, this is something delicious. I want to seek out this pattern. And so they really need to hit a model quickly or this falls apart. Or it's not, at least it's not going to be protecting the mimic. Now, any questions about that? You understand why we got to have more models and mimics? Okay. So for a long time, we thought that a classic example that you might see on this slide would be like the monarch butterfly and the viceroy, which looks very similar. However, upon more research, what we found was they were not actually Batesian mimics, they're Müllerian mimics. And so in Müllerian mimicry, both the model and the mimic are distasteful. And so everybody tastes bad, everybody's harmful. And so it turns out that monarchs not only taste bad, but viceroys also taste bad. And so this is really common in the butterflies. They're not the only group, but this is one group that people are kind of familiar with. And you have lots of butterflies in different groups that have very similar patterns, like the swallowtails on the other side. So that's the monarch, if you don't know, on that side. This side is the swallowtails. And so what's nice about Müllerian mimicry is they all taste bad, and so you don't have to worry about your ratio of models to mimics that we were discussing at the end of the last slide. And so that the predator should encounter one, have a bad experience, and then should avoid that pattern completely, which protects all of the species that have evolved to have that particular pattern. That's going to allow for better population fluctuation, since that's what we spent most of our semester looking at is population stuff. Because some years the monarch's population might be doing really well, and then other years maybe the viceroy population is doing better, right? And so that's going to help to account for that type of stuff. All right, any questions about mimicry? All right, next up, we can have some physical defenses, such as armor, which is shells are basically the same thing, right? Armor. Spines, anything like that. And these are spines that don't sting, like the caterpillar I showed earlier, right? Just spines that are pokey. So in the middle, we have a kind of an interesting scenario set up. It's talking about ones that will close up completely, like the box turtles, if they haven't eaten too many mushrooms anyway. If they've eaten too many mushrooms, then they can't close up. But if they can close up, then you have to ask yourself, is the predator large or small? Is it really a threat to you? And then if you close up, you have to decide when you're going to look out. Like how long is the predator going to sit there waiting for you to open up, basically? And so the turtles, it depends. And it's probably some of it has to do with the experience of that particular turtle. But I've picked up box turtles that'll close up, and then, less than a minute, they'll open back up. And then I've had other box turtles that clam up, and I mean, they stay clammed up for a long time. Right? And then how much foraging time do you sacrifice while you're staying closed up when potentially the predator has already moved on and you don't need to be closed up any longer? See, there's a lot to think about. So in my freshman biology class, which I don't teach very often anymore, in majors class, I have them read an article that's similar to this, that's about snakes. Like how long do you spend playing dead, for example, if you're a hognose snake, before rolling over and crawling and going away? How long is the threat actually going to be there? Because there is a trade-off that you have to consider. And so roly-polies also roll up completely. They got some good armor. And then at the bottom, what's the bottom animal? It's not the roly-poly. And they can throw their spines, right? No, they can't throw their spines. I have one from Africa, though, that I smuggled back in my house. I find that if you put something in your dirty laundry, they don't look very hard. It was just sitting on the ground. It was pretty cool. What happens if you do tangle with a porcupine? How many times are you going to tangle with a porcupine?
Once.
You would hope once, but dogs are more stubborn and probably continue to do it.
Some are more aggressive than others. I think mine, if it got close enough and tried to bite it, it would just be once. She's so apprehensive, I don't even know if she'd bite it. It really depends on the personality, I think. That one at the top, if you type in porcupine and dog, that's the one that comes up. That's a pretty dramatic. The one that I have the actual number of quills, they pulled out 1,347 quills out of that dog's head. They don't come out easily. They have like little hooks on them that cause them to migrate deeper as you try to work with them. So generally what they have to do is they have to put the dog, not to sleep dead, but to sleep so they can pull the porcupine quills out. And then they can recover just fine, but it's got to be a pretty horrible. The one at the bottom, like after the other three pictures, the one at the bottom with the hand, I'm like, oh, you got a little baby porcupine. But still, it would be unpleasant for that to happen. All right. Next up, we have behavioral adaptations. And there's a lot of things that we could talk about that fall under this category. Probably what you'd think about right away are things like the distraction display, which is the killdeer at the bottom, that pretends like they have a broken wing to try to lure predators away from their nests because they're ground nesters, which is extremely vulnerable. Others will do something called a rodent run, other types of birds, and that's where they kind of tuck their wings and they get down really low and they run through the grass trying to mimic like a vole or a mouse running through the grass to try to distract the predator. So there are a couple of different types of distraction displays you can see. I've mentioned two animals that play dead. The hognose snake is one. The hognose snake not only will roll over and play dead, but it'll burst some vessels in its eyes, which will cause its head to get a little bloody to try to sell it. When I was an undergrad, I worked at the 4-H camp that used to be in Milan. It's not there anymore. Dean Byford would bring a hognose snake. This is a little mean now in retrospect, I guess, but we used to have something called the snake bite club, which is something we don't do anymore because you don't want a snake biting multiple people because you can spread blood. You share blood when you do that because they get blood on their fangs and then they bite somebody else, so you can transmit a disease, right? So we can't have it anymore. But that was back in the olden days. And he would bring out a hognose snake and to make the point that you could never make a hognose snake bite you. Like every time you would grab it or touch it, it's automatically just rolls over. Right? It doesn't. Striking is not its defense, essentially. So I don't know how much y'all have gotten to see and play with hognose snakes. And then of course we got the possum, where you get the name, playing possum. these are all my photos on this slide. This was at my house before I moved out to the country, actually. This was still in town. My dog ran out, found the possum, started barking at it, and it did confuse her. It wasn't my current dog, Nala, it was my former dog, Rosie. And so Rosie was just barking and dancing around it all over the place, and it just curled up. You can see it's got a little bit of a hiss going, but that's about it. And then I grabbed the dog and put the dog inside, and it took a while. Like we were talking about before, how long do you stay in this position? It took a while, and it eventually got up and walked away.
I think, has there been research lately that's said that it's like an involuntary response in them? Like it's kind of, I think, more on par with like.
It doesn't ring with my experience with possums,
Okay.
because they don't do it every time you scare one. So if it's involuntary, you'd expect them to. That doesn't mean that there's not. There's probably some involuntary to it, because it's a probably an innate behavior, and so you have to have a particular trigger. But the hognose snake, I definitely believe it, because I mean, if you just pick it up, it starts trying to roll over. I mean, that's just its genetic response to being hassled. But if you get a possum, like when I get a possum in my compost bin, its response isn't to play dead. It's the hiss and growl. I've really only seen it play dead once, out of all the possums I've run up on. So.
I had a bunch of possums and box traps, and the only one that actually played dead ended up actually just dying. Like it just never died. They literally, like, because I ended up just pulling him out of the trap because he was playing dead at that point, and I like put him off to the side and came back the next day after resetting it that night, and he was still there and he was dead.
Mm-hmm. So that's my only hesitation with that, because they definitely don't always play dead. But once it goes into that behavior, I think that's probably genetic, like an innate behavior. I don't know what triggers it though. All right, so that's some distraction displays, playing dead, things like that. Oh, I didn't talk about the top one. I skipped that one. Alarm calls. Alarm calls are really interesting. They do a lot of research with this, with birds, of course. That's what I'm going to be most familiar with. But primates also give alarm calls, yeah, as well as other species. And they're kind of interesting because they often aren't species specific. Especially this time of year, you have mixed species flocks. So you have like chickadees and titmice and occasionally downy woodpeckers, and then also hanging around probably some kinglets that are all together. And so they need signals that'll work across species. And so if you've had ornithology, you've seen me go out in the woods and I'll go psh, 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 psh. Okay, it's called pishing. And what I'm doing is I'm mimicking an alarm call. And often, not always, but often that'll bring the birds in closer, sometimes so that you can see them, which is why I'm doing it in class. And so that's really important. So the alarm calls often are also where they can't be recognized, or they can't locate the giver. Okay, they have a specific structure about them that makes it difficult to isolate which particular individual is giving the alarm call. It's kind of in a lot of ways like what fish do when they release pheromones into the water. You're telling all the fish nearby that there's a predator there, so it's kind of a very similar type of thing. When I think I might have told you all this already. When I took behavioral ecology, we learned about, I call it the white butt hypothesis, but that's not right. I don't remember the right name. But where the deer are flagging, right? And so a lot of that is thought also to be kind of an alarm call type of behavior, in which they're flagging and letting other deer in the area know, or possibly letting you know that you've been spotted, which is another part of this. All right, so that's behavioral. The next one, we get living in large groups. All right, and so predators, first of all, predators are less likely to attack large groups than they are to attack smaller groups. And then one predator attacking a large group is likely only going to take one. And so your odds are either, if you're on your own, 100%, potentially, right? But if you're in a group of 1,000, then you're one of 1,000, right? So your odds are just better not being taken by a predator by living in a group. And then you can also, as a group, confuse predators. And so out at Reelfoot, when it's cold, hopefully, we're supposed to be very cold this weekend. I don't know if you have looked ahead. Pack warm clothes to go see your family, because I think our high on Sunday is only like 36 or something here in Martin. But if it gets really cold, we'll get some big groups of snow geese and ducks and things that settle in around Reelfoot Lake. And it must be exhausting being a snow goose, because they will settle down on the ground and start doing their snow goose thing, I guess. And then an eagle will fly over. And the eagle is not trying to directly attack the snow geese in particular. What they're trying to do is to get the snow geese to make that big funnel that they make when they take off. So one of the park rangers over there, he would always tell me, I just saw a tornado of geese over there. That's what he'd say. So that big tornado of geese. And what they're hoping is, in all of the chaos and confusion, is a couple of the geese collide, one of them breaks a wing, and now you're in the speed of what an eagle actually wants. Right? They don't want a healthy goose. They want a injured goose, essentially. And they'll do that repeatedly. If you get an area where the snow geese are down in large numbers, there'll be several eagles around, and every time the snow geese settle, the eagle will soar back over again, and here they go tornadoing back up in the sky, and that kind of thing.
It's kind of smart, actually.
It is pretty smart. It's fun for me. When the lake freezes up is when it's the most fun, because then everything gets concentrated wherever you find open water. So you can go to the open water, and the ducks and geese will be sitting there, and there'll be 20 eagles sitting around, and it's just one after another go down and spooking up the waterfowl. Then we got the zebra down at the bottom. There's been lots of discussion about why zebras have stripes. They're not the only animals to have black and white stripes, and so it's kind of a discussion. But when you put them all together like this, you can see one of the reasons is potentially it's difficult to tell one individual from another, right? Which is kind of this idea of being in a group. It's kind of a dizzying effect when you're looking at them. When I think I've mentioned it here, I've been to Botswana on safari. We were debating why they have stripes. And somebody in the group said, well, I read it wasn't for this purpose that I just described, but rather because so you can tell individuals apart, because each has an individual pattern. And I'm like, why does it have to be one or the other, right? It can be both. It can both confuse a predator and cause them to blend into the environment, and also be individual and allow them to tell individuals apart, right? It doesn't have to be just one.
I read somewhere that it was also to deter flies.
Yes, they have been showing some of that. So they painted zebras solid. Yeah. Colors to see about that type of thing. We do that kind of stuff a lot. They do, I don't remember what species they did.
I know they did it on a cow.
Yeah, they did it on a cow. They put stripes on a cow. And I think they said, isn't it all white? Which doesn't make sense, because white tends to attract mosquitoes anyway.
Sorry.
No, y'all can share. It's fine.
No, we're just talking about the weird smell that appears.
Yeah, the-
Okay,
Okay, I'm so
like-
glad because it smells like burnt popcorn, and I'm like, I'm not about to lick popcorn.
No,
Oh, are they cleaning something in the downstairs in the autoclave or something?
possibly.
Yeah. That's what's great about biology buildings.
I know,
I
right?
was
like,
like, salt in
damn,
my
I
nose.
just took a shower
I'm too
last
far
night,
away from
Jesus.
the vent, I
I
guess.
was like, I know, I watched these clothes.
What were we talking about? Oh yeah, we're talking about zebras and how awesome they are. I feel like there was some other reason that came up in that conversation, but I can't think of the reason why now. But yeah, flies is another one. I've seen that one as well. I don't remember now. It was really cool, and y'all are gonna like remember it forever. All right, anything else about zebras or snow geese? Snow geese are pretty awesome to watch. I'm kind of scared of geese in generally though, because when I was a kid, this Canada goose chased me down when I was trying to eat my French fries. So I pretty much stay away from them. Use my spotting scope.
Geese are
Yeah, geese are evil.
I hate cicadas.
scars to prove it.
I got tons of memes that proves it. All the memes about geese being evil. They're definitely aggressive, for sure. So another thing you can do is timing of reproduction, and there's two different strategies in this slide. Actually, there's overlapping strategies, I should say, in this slide. One is giving you kind of the aquatic mayfly type of thing, when stoneflies and things, when they just flood the environment, when you have a big opening of that. And that's a great picture there of the guys in the boat doing some research in the middle of one of those. And the idea here isn't that the predators aren't going to be able to catch them. And it's kind of a cruel strategy in a way, right? It's that the predators are going to eat so many that they get full, and then the rest of them get to live and carry out their life cycle. But that's the strategy. And these species have as many babies as they possibly can in a short period of time in order to do that. And they're short-lived, of course, these types of species. And then the other one is that's where I say it's overlapping. It's kind of a different thing where you have your timing of reproduction is you don't come out every year, but rather you come out at irregular, well, per species it's a regular interval, I guess, but you're overall between the different species, they're coming out irregularly. And when they do come out, the cicadas come out in large numbers and flood the environment. But at first, it's almost like, depending on the timing in between, it's almost like the predators are gonna lose their institutional memory, right? They're gonna forget about them more or less. And so you've got at least a certain period of time once they come out after 18 years or whatever it is, before the predators get a search image and start to eat them. So you got a little bit of a delay. And then you've also flooded the environment and they eat as many as they want. I've cut open bass, just full of them, stuff like that when you have emergencies. So that's a little bit about timing of reproduction. What it means by that is just flood the environment or come out at different times. All right, any questions about that? All right, the next topic's just perfect for Thanksgiving. It's a cannibalism. Cannibalism happens a lot more than most people, lay people, I guess, think about. It's been observed in a wide variety of species, including people. You have some cultures that are centered around it that had beliefs like you would gain intelligence if you ate the brain of your opponent, or strength if you ate their heart, and things like that. So there's been a lot of that in our culture. My professor, my major professor from Mississippi State, went to Madagascar, which is on my bucket list. I haven't made it there yet. And a lot of those people are descended from tribes that would have been cannibals in the past. And he was talking about on some of the tours, they would discuss how it was easy to take the people who were formerly cannibals and move them into Christianity. Because in Christianity, you have the eating of the blood and body of Christ, right? And so that was like just kind of an interesting thing to think about. That it was a transition from cannibalism into Christianity with them mostly being Catholic down there at this point. Of course, Catholic and Catholic belief, when you partake of the wine and bread, that becomes the flesh and blood in your body. Just kind of an interesting thing. I thought it was interesting when he told us about it. About 50% of the terrestrial cannibals, which are mostly insects, are normally herbivorous, which is kind of interesting to think about. So 50% are normally carnivorous and they just turn on each other. But 50% are herbivores. They're just munching on a plant and they're like, ooh, I think I'm going to eat Bob. It's not quite that simple. They're going to munch on their plants unless they experience a shortage of protein. Okay? And that's where you get into trouble. So they're having a nutrient deficiency, essentially. That's when they turn into cannibalism. So this example I'm going to give you is not cannibalism, but it kind of shows you where you have nutrient shortages. So down along the coast, we have nitrogen-poor soils, and so that's where you start to find your carnivorous plants like sundews and pitcher plants and things, which is pretty cool to go and see. But that lack of nitrogen in the soil passes up into the herbivores as well. And so in the springtime, tons of ornithologists go down there and they set up mist nets to study stopover, the birds coming from the Gulf of Mexico. Then they'll ban them and check their health and things before they move on up north. And one of the problems that they have in areas where they have nitrogen-poor soils is the deer will come up and eat the birds out of their mist nets if they're not careful. And that's not going to happen around here. Our deer are not nutrient-poor, so we don't have that kind of thing. But that's what they're doing. They're missing that nutrient that they're not getting from the plants because it's missing from the soil, and so then they look for other sources. So again, that's not cannibalism, but it's the idea of where you can get some cannibalism. Cannibalism is often associated with stressed populations, and so if there's not enough food to go around, then they begin to look at each other and be like, hey, right? And so that's where you got the soccer team. You know, that movie's pretty old now, but if you watch the movie Alive with the Indian soccer team that crashed in the Himalayas, they ended up eating one of them. Yeah, I've never watched it. It's not my thing. I don't know. I think I'd have to be in a pretty stressed situation before I turn to cannibalism. I guess we would all hope that's the case. But there is a movie out there about it. And so that's to get us introduced into it. And so the conditions that tend to promote cannibalism include crowded conditions where there's not enough food. So we're getting to those situations where I threw the pizza in here and locked the door. We started out with dividing the pizza up equally and everybody's hungry, right? But then we got somebody was going to beat everybody else up and bogart the pizza. And so now I'm just going to lock the door and leave you in here with no pizza and see what happens. We got like a month over the break where the building will be mostly empty. Stress, especially when individuals of low social rank are being bullied by higher ranked individuals. That's also a big problem with the primates, right? Right, Brian? You get some bullying of those low level individuals.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, and then you get the presence of vulnerable individuals such as nests and eggs. And probably you don't think about it, but if you eat the egg of your own species, that's cannibalism, right? That's an individual. It's a fertilized egg anyway. And that happens quite a lot. There are a lot of birds that will sneak into each other's nest and either kill their nestlings and eat their eggs and do things like that.
I know some that scrambles eggs, like the leftover eggs from their chickens, because they have like just a huge amount of overproduction. They can't sell them, they'll scramble and throw them out in their yard, and they have all kinds of birds that come and eat them.
Yep. When I was an undergraduate, and I took ornithology, we had to do, I didn't know at the time, some of you have heard, how much time we got? So I accidentally took ornithology. I don't know how many of you heard that story. So I was a sophomore and I needed another class, and I saw ornithology. It's one that I had to have because I was wildlife, or one of the ones I could choose. And I thought, oh yeah, it's got a 6 o'clock lab. And I interpreted that as a night lab. It was 6 to 9. That's a night class, right? And so the first day of class, I found out it was 6 a.m., which luckily for y'all, it's now been moved to 7 a.m., not 6 a.m. And so what I didn't know was the reason I was able to get into it as a sophomore is because the regular professor was on leave that semester, and I actually took it from a guy who was a herpetologist, and then I ended up working for him trapping turtles at Reelfoot one summer. And so I kind of accidentally took it for a couple of reasons and got into it earlier than I would normally be able to get into it. But we had to do these small projects in there. They didn't have to be very complicated, just a little research project. And so I chose to put out different things to see if the birds would take them. So I put out coffee grounds. I remember coffee grounds. I don't remember what else, but I also put out crushed eggs, eggshells. And the crushed eggshells went just like that. Because birds, especially female birds, tend to have calcium deficiencies because it takes a lot of calcium to make and lay your eggs. So yeah. All of that stuff, kind of eating your own products, and there's a lot of species that if their egg doesn't hatch, they'll consume the egg. All right, so what's the benefit of eating your neighbor? Well, one, it reduces competition, right? And so this works great, right? Because let me get it all up there before I overstep. This works great because you get a full belly, and now you don't have to share your resources with your neighbor anymore because they're gone, and it's just going to alleviate some of that stress. So that's great. It's going to reduce the probability that you're going to have a local extinction, meaning that species disappears from that area. It's going to improve the condition for the survivors because now they have fewer individuals to share the limited resources that they have. And then overall, you're turning the ones that you ate into new individuals eventually, assuming that conditions improve after the cannibalistic display. And so it works out well for everybody but the one that got ate. Under what conditions would you become cannibalistic? Well, for the Indians team, it took no food, stuck in the mountains, don't know when you're going to be rescued type of thing, right? So it's
Yeah.
extreme situations. All right, our last topic of the semester is going to be community structure. And we're not going to go too far into it today because we don't have a lot of time. And we got to have something to talk about next week, right? But basically, what I want to point out is that we've really already been discussing community structure for a while, but we've been using population models to do so, right? And so really we started talking about communities when we started talking about competition between members of different species. So that was really the start of community ecology. What we're going to do for our very last topic is we are going to discuss community structure for the most part. And so we're going to talk about biodiversity. That's a big one. How do you calculate biodiversity? And we're going to talk about island biogeography, which is the last question on your homework. And I've already mentioned it this semester because we have replaced it to a large extent with metapopulation models. So if you don't remember what metapopulation modeling is, you might review that real quick, because once we discuss island biogeography, I'm going to bring it back and tell you why metapopulation model is better, and I'm going to show you kind of how we're using metapopulation models today. Okay, so that's what we're going to do next week. And that's all I really wanted to say about today, other than I took both of these pictures too. And so, you see the pronghorns? They're pretty awesome, right? See the prairie dog? He's there, right there. There's a prairie dog. This was 2005, I think I took this picture. I had just started here as a professor, so I didn't have money for my fancy schmancy camera that I have today. What now?
I was 3.
Thank you. Makes me feel so good. All right, get out of here 5 minutes early. It's okay.